Om Brahmanandam Paramasukadam Kevalam Gyanamurtim Dandvaititam Gaganasadrisham Tattvamashadi Laksham Ekam Nityam Vimalamatchalam Sarvadi Sakshibhutam Bhavatitam Trigunarahitam Sadgurum Tan Namami. Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. We salute the leader of our souls, through whose grace our ignorance is dispelled, who is beyond good and bad, pleasure and pain, life and death, and all other pairs of opposites. We recognize that one as the only witness to the changing phenomena of this universe. May we, through that grace, go beyond darkness and delusion and realize the truth in this very life. Om peace, peace, peace. Om Vedanta Siddhanta Nirukti Resha Brahmaiva Jivaham Sagalam Jagadcha Akanda Rupa Stiti Reva Moksho Brahmadvitiye Shrutayaha Pramanam. Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. It is the apt and final conclusion of the Vedanta that all is Brahman. Time, space, living beings, and the world. Living in constant recognition of this fact is what is called enlightenment. Brahman is one without a second, pure and perfect. And the revealed scriptures are the sure and certain proof of this fact. Om peace, peace, peace. Om Sahana, Om Sahana Vavatu, Sahana Bhunaktu, Sahaviryam Karvavahai, Tejasvi Navaditamastu, Ma Vidvishovahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May Brahman protect us, may Brahman sustain us, may Brahman illumine our thinking process. May we not find fault with each other, with the teachings or with the world, and may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om. It is the fourth straight class in the subject of Shakta Advaita Vada. Shakta meaning that divine energy, Shakti, which is in all of us all, also points directly to the presence of the Divine Mother of the universe. Call her Kali or Durga or Saraswati, Parvati, and by other august names that she goes by, hundreds and thousands of them really, in stotrams that are sung in temples all around India and in other parts of the world. Even we, our very selves, will be singing one of them this month on Christmas Eve, which happens to also be Holy Mother's birthday, Sri Sharda Devi's birthday. Today is also, by the way, Bodhi Day. It's when the Zen Buddhists celebrate the awakening of Lord Buddha. A little bit different than the rest of the Buddhist schools. All the Buddhist schools have different days, I think. Basically, it's known, he's known as the thrice blessed one, born, went into nirvana and got his enlightenment on a full moon, 3 different full moons. So he's often called the thrice blessed one. But of course, Buddhism appears in various locations because of that wonderful spread of that very pure and perfect religion as it went from on foot, mostly carried by monks and mendicants to different parts of the world, so that we have all sorts of strains of Buddhism now, but basically all based on the Four Noble Truths and the doctrine of interdependent arising and the 12 links nidanas to the rebirth principle, reincarnation it's called. So anyway, today we acknowledge Lord Buddha too, as we often do here. We had even a Zen retreat here a few months back, where many of us gathered and dressed in black and went through a lot of the Buddhist teachings that are there in the scriptures, many scriptures that are available to us of that darshana. And darshana is one of the things we'll be talking about today, because that's where we left off last week with this chart on your right called Astika Nastika. But if we want to first show the chart on the left, re-show it, that is, we see that Astika Nastika are parts of these two pillars, in which are surrounding her, holding up this throne that she sits on, as it were, and also along with other great concomitants of India's darshanas, like moksha. We talked about a liberation of the kind that's already at hand. It's not something that can be gained through practice or through time, through purification. We went through all of that last week, if you remember. The true meaning of moksha, also word they use is mukti. So moksha is there on one of her pillars as a very high level of attainment, if you will, because it can't be attained, I just said, so I'm already contradicting myself. But on a qualified non-dual level, it's something that we reach for. It's as we speak of Lord Buddha, he said, Gatam, Gatam, Paragatam. We go beyond all goals, Gatam, to the Paragatam, to the supreme goal. So it is okay for the human being to think in terms of goals. We would call them in Hinduism or in Vedanta avastas, or stages. We talked about it this morning, actually, in satsang, that the soul goes from stage to stage and qualifies itself for higher knowledge, higher wisdom, and finally for non-dual truth and samadhi. So that's also here on the chart. We've talked about samadhi last week in terms of the 4 types of seated samadhis, if you remember, that the father of yoga had taught us. Savitarka and Savichara, with their Nirvitarka concomitants, Nirvichara concomitants, and then Sananda and Sasmita. These are basically samadhis of wisdom and inner wisdom and bliss, samadhis of bliss, and then samadhis of cosmic I-ness or I-amness. These are all seated samadhis, the last one having just the tiniest tendril of the sense of I left in the human being. It's been so purified, senses, body, mind, and finally ego. When one finally, as he said in some of the quotes we took last week, purifies the ego and ripens it and turns it into one with the Father. So all of a sudden you've transcended individuality of all types, whether that be unripe ego or even ripe ego, and you're beginning to, like the line, turning into a line and a space and a line and a space. If you want to put it in sign language, it's a pun there, S-I-N-E, sign language. We know that the distracted mind is erratic like that. And then the sometimes distracted, sometimes concentrated mind is peaks and valleys. See? It'll be even for a while. It's called sattva. And we'll have to look at the gunas here pretty soon. They're here on the pillar too. Probably get to that next week. So sattva is that guna of balance, and rajas is the guna of restlessness that it accosts the mind, and also slothfulness or laziness that accosts the mind. That's the third guna. So sometimes that valley is like a peak, higher consciousness, and then the flat line is evenness, and then the dip is depression, or sometimes restlessness that wears you out. Could even be a valley, or leading to a valley. So we talked about that in terms of the 4 samadhis and how the mind becomes flatline. It is dead to all negative suggestion. That's the kind of death you want, is to die to things that are erratic and cause suffering, as we first noble truth of Lord Buddha. So or actually that's the second noble truth. Suffering is the first noble truth. Let me clarify that. And then there's a cause for it, is the second noble truth. So those gunas, you could put them in a good category for blaming. See, oh, it's the guna's fault. See, my mind is constantly going through these modes. Well, all minds do. There's even the dark night of the soul of the very enlightened mind, because they're looking at your suffering as a individual, as a race, as a culture, as a world, because there are many worlds inside, many heavens in the kingdom of God. So when they look at like that, their mind gets despondent, their mind gets a little restless. And Swami Vivekananda was in a divine restlessness all the time, trying to figure out the problems of this world in the brief 39 years that he was amongst us, and only several of those were spent in the West. So those people who saw him pacing a lot and thinking, and it wasn't a restlessness that was negative. It was cracking open the great problems and bringing higher solutions like these to us, so that I could sit here, some certain amount of decades later and begin to teach this dharmic transmission to people as other teachers are doing in their different traditions. It's just that in Vedanta and in Tantra and in Buddhism and all these darshanas in India, you can go on talking and talking for lifetimes and not really get it all accomplished. It's eternal, like the soul, like consciousness, like the worlds, like your own soul. This wisdom is eternal. So therefore, we come to the conclusion that we should probably just be dipping our mind in it over and over again, if not just once a week like we're doing here Sunday, but also at home once a day, is to check in with the teachings as if on some sort of a dharmic roulette wheel, where that marble is spinning for the mind and it's going to settle in a particular slot with a particular cosmic number at any given time, and on that day you pick up the scriptures, you'll have a revelation that will be key to your spiritual life. Where on other days you might pick it up and the tamas and the rajas in your mind might be not permitting you to have that kind of experience. So constancy was one of Divine Mother's favorite qualities. She likes perseverance, and she likes purity, and she likes practice. The 3 Ps. So if you can put those together, that is, practice constantly and try and gain a pure mind, chit shuddhi, then you'll start having these kinds of samadhis. They may come to you before you even know you're in them. All of a sudden, one day, like the Indian poet, you'll wake up and say, this day I woke up this morning and my ignorance was gone, utterly gone. Who can veil the truth? Who can keep a blazing fire tied in a cotton cloth? So the truth will suggest itself to you through wisdom teachings. That's, by the way, what the West is missing. We're getting a lot of faith-based tradition, some of it mixed with fundamentalism and other higher nature, but we're not getting a lot of the wisdom transmitted to us, and that's where we when you see souls, Americans, Europeans, and so forth, running for the East, then you shouldn't step forward and blame them for abandoning your religion, like, say, in the West, because they're looking for something of substance that will help them fly. And you know what I mean by that. The bird needs 2 wings to fly. And my teacher was always repeating that teaching, so I might as well too. Bhakti and Jnanam, devotion and wisdom. Wisdom keeps devotion from getting too sentimental, and devotion keeps wisdom from getting too dry. So if you put them together, they'll check each other, and then your spiritual life can take flight. The soul can actually take flight. So it's a ancient teaching set in stone in India, that this wisdom portion of the transmission is very important. It's the only thing that will destroy ignorance. Bhakti has to be, that is, devotion has to be very intense and very pure for it to destroy your ignorance, says Narada in the Bhakti Sutras. So, but knowledge can be even of a higher nature, a dharmic nature, and your ignorance will start to erode right away. You're talking about something that's broaching the truth, you see, that's leading you to the truth. And Vivekananda says, I can compare truth to the most corrosive substance in the universe. It will burn through everything. Soft things quickly, harder things, it'll take more time. But it will burn through. So there is that importance, or the import of perseverance. You keep taking these teachings again and again, even if your ego-mind mechanism, as we say in Vedanta, sometimes complains about it. You say, oh, that's too much, or it's too much words, or it's too much of scripture and so forth. The point isn't that you can learn it all in one lifetime. I just said it was eternal. It just keeps going on and on. The point is to expose yourself to it so you find that combination of the right moment, auspicious timing, and the right teaching, and the openness of the mind in a particular guna. Like it's open on a particular time only when sattva visits it, and that's when the teaching comes. And if you didn't keep persevering and reading the scriptures every day and so forth, you'd miss that time. You'd miss that important time. Same with your meditations. Holy Mother said, if you have 365 meditations a year, and 50 of them are good, and many others are not so good, but 12 of them are perfectly timed with the cosmic clock to transmit to you something essential for your spiritual life, but you didn't keep up 365 times a year, you might have missed those 12, and therefore let yourself out the back door and not being able to use these teachings in the way they're meant. They're meant to linger inside the mind. Manana. So first Shravana, here, Manana, then roll it over and over in your mind. That might be for days, for weeks, for years. Some of them even for lifetimes, in the case of some subtle non-dual teachings, until that right combination of things happens. And that's back to the avastas, the stages again. As you reach a certain stage, it's very unlikely you're going to fall back from it. You've attained that ground, and it's not a sunken ground anymore. You see, it's a more elevated ground, and you like it there, and you acclimatize to it, and that's your default zone. And then through the weeks and months and years of your sadhana, you attain the next higher level and the next higher level, until finally, I feel fine, thank you. My ignorance is gone, 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 utterly gone. And the truth is becoming more and more apparent to me all the time. And now it's just a matter of perseverance until the truth dawns on me and sets me free. So what I'm saying here, and I'm speaking mostly to a Western audience, I think, is that we probably should get over that habit of quick fix, that we want everything quickly and right away, like we can get other things in an opulent society. We need to take the, pardon the expression, old-fashioned way in terms of scriptures and teachings and gurus and dharma, and look back into this perennial truth that is constant and dip ourselves into it over and over and over again, like a stream running outside your back door. Go outside every day, jump in, clean yourself off, come back in, go to work, next day do the same thing. Sri Ramakrishna used to tell a funny story about the man who headed for the Ganges River with all the vulture sins perched on his shoulder. All the sins that he had committed throughout the days and months of his life were like vultures perched on his shoulders. As soon as they saw the Ganges, they flew off, perched in nearby trees, and the man bathed himself and came out all free and pure of his sins. But as soon as he left the proximity of the Ganges River, the vultures came flying back and lit on his shoulders again. So to purge yourself of sin for all time, is these transgressions, is to make your abode on the banks of the river and make sure that you dip into it every day. That's what the seers have done, and that's why they're in a state of samadhi. So they go into these states of lower samadhis, middling samadhis, higher samadhis, and then occasionally, because they keep their mind in that kind of samadhi, they will have occasionally an experience of asampragyata, or nirvikalpa over here, that we talked about last week. They will have an experience of non-duality that's very stunning. Sometimes they call that jada samadhi. And we think probably Buddha and Christ, to name a few, went into it under the bo tree or in the wilderness for those 40 days. Seems like 40 days is a good amount of days to put yourself into practice for that highest state of non-duality, because they got stunned and sat for a long time. See, and it wasn't a matter of austerity, because Buddha had already done all his austerities before he sat like that. Finally, he just sat under the tree, and everything revealed itself over time, over that 40 or 50-day sit that he had. And Christ, too, in the wilderness became stunned with what he saw inside, and birds pecked grains out of his hair, so he must have sat there a long time for grains to gather in his scalp under that tree, whatever tree that was, another form of the Bodhi tree. So we know that this is the case, and it relates to us the import of perseverance and practice. But this exposure first, you have to be exposed to it all. So those are some of the things we brought forward last week in terms of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, or Sampragata Samadhi, and Salvikalpa Samadhi and Sampragata Samadhi, the seated samadhis. And then we talked about moksha, being a state always at hand, instead of looking at it as something I'm going to attain in the future, like, as my teacher used to say, with a post-mortem emancipation. I do not care for a post-mortem emancipation, is what he used to say. So he had realized the eternal nature of liberation. Just like that river you would dip in. It's always running through you, but you're failing to recognize it. We could call it an underground river, so it needs to be detected by things that are appearing on the surface. A certain line of trees or marshes that are growing on the surface, then you could dig in that area and there's water. So there's an underground river running in every being, and that's that river of this constant freedom. And that's why we all yearn for it, especially after a certain time in the body, when it becomes clear to us that pleasures and objects, sense objects and so forth, cannot fulfill us, that they're not real, as the Vedanta says. Quantum physics actually agrees with that. It hasn't made that conclusion yet, emotionally, psychologically, but it does know that everything is consisting of vibrating particles, changing at a billionth of a second. So it doesn't sound like a very stable world. So therefore you can't get attached to it, and you can't get satisfaction or satiation from it. What you need to do is return to this state of eternal bliss inside of you. They call that word ananda. So that is what one of the final samadhis is, the samadhi of ananda. It's called sananda, with bliss. And that ripens the ego to a full extent because it allows it to see the difference between its individual bliss and the bliss of Brahman. And when it sees that, sort of like looking at the moon and seeing that it shines by borrowed light, and then turning to the sun and saying, oh, that's got its own light, that's when the soul turns from its individual bliss to this eternal bliss that it aspires, when it goes into, or puts itself in the periphery of non-duality. It's a very steep slope there, very subtle, easy to slip and fall. So you attain that by stages too. So we looked at all of those things last week as sort of a crown that's over Mother's crown. You see, it's all these highest principles that are there: samadhi, moksha, om, nirguna and saguna Brahman. Next week we'll probably also look at Advaita Vada and Aparinama, the two great appendages off those pillars. That is, the birthless, deathless nature of the soul. We have to teach ourselves, or unteach ourselves, that about birth and death. And then non-transformation of things, or the apparent transformation of things, not getting hypnotized by change, by appearances, being able to penetrate through appearances and get to the stable principle that's underlying everything. So we'll look at that next week. But this week, let's pick up as Krishna says in the Gita, the thread of our yoga. We do that from lifetime to lifetime, those of us who are practicing this yoga of immersion into the ever-flowing rivers inside of us. the nadis, or the nerves, the currents of wisdom that are flowing. A lot of people are not acknowledging those. They don't see them. They flow right by. They're underground, as I said. So when one begins to see these currents, first you'll hear it as a current of words from your teacher, and they'll batter your ears, you see, and they'll cost the mind and the ego. And it's all a revolution going on, you see, a revolution of laziness, battling laziness, revolution of restlessness. A lot of people hear the teachings and they go, they get so restless they want to attain enlightenment tomorrow, you see? Or they want it right away, that quick fix again. And it's going to take a while for karmas from past lifetimes and from impressions from last lifetimes, they're called samskaras in the mind, to wear away. When Swamiji Vivekananda says, truth wears away soft things easy, quickly, lust, anger, greed, envy, all of the things that we're usually dealing with, emotionalism and so forth. Truth can get rid of that quickly if you take them to task and hear the truth. But the things that take a while are to burn through. The hard substances will be these karmas from past lifetimes, the samskaras that are a part of your mind, your brain-mind complex right now, and things like the gunas, which impose themselves on everyone, as I said, even on the great souls. Embodiment itself is a kind of difficulty. There's a teaching in the tradition which says that people build up a desire for embodiment. They have a addiction to prana. They don't even know what prana is, but they're addicted to it. So it's life force. It's what gives you the enjoyment out of tasting food and out of seeing sights and hearing sounds. It's that energy that is really causing your enjoyment. So people get very attached to that. You can see why. They think that's all of life, even if they don't have a name for it. It's your energy, basically. Even science is sort of obsessed with energy. And so it's no surprise that occultists and metaphysicians and so forth will get sort of attached to subtle energy. That is psychic energy and prana and so forth. So that's the kind of addiction that's there in people. So that thirst for life is what Vivekananda called it. So when you want to break that chain, snap that chain, and quit being dragged from birth to death and death to birth, as he says in his Song of the Sannyasin, then you will start using that prana to go deeper and deeper and find these rivers of wisdom in you, these flows, these streams of consciousness, if you want to put it that way. And you'll align yourself with them, align the mind with them. So first, the words will have to strike your eardrums. And then, if they can penetrate in deeper over time, that's why you use time, then they will become manana. They'll become a sort of fine wine that you're rolling along the tongue of your mind, and getting just the right taste and the right pedigree and everything. You say, oh, that wine is 5,000 years old. Now you're talking about a very, very ancient amrit, nectar. And so a good realized philosopher or seer can think, oh, that's the Samkhya wine. That's one of the oldest and most cured of wines, you see. Or maybe that's more contemporary wine. See. So he'll have a way of judging by time and by taste. But it has to be a taste of the mind. That's where the five senses are all connected to, is this mind complex. So when that happens, then everything experiences a revolution. Senses go inward. Body even becomes healthy. We were just studying about that in 3:44 through 47 of Raja Yoga, if you all received it in the email a couple days ago. The third pada, 44th through 47th sutras, Patanjali is talking about the yogi's body and how it becomes clear complexion, a good voice, healthy all the time, and sit very easily, and can get into meditation quickly. So those are some of the attributes of a body-mind mechanism, or we call psychophysical being, that has been cured in yoga for a long time. So part of that curative process then is these darshanas we look into, the tastes of the mind. And we started looking at them last week with this new chart that I formulated called Astika and Nastika. Now that's on these pillars of our original chart we're using for this series of classes. Astika means traditional or orthodox, that is accepted by the orthodoxy, and Nastika means non-orthodox. And to repeat the teaching, just because it's non-orthodox in India, there's not a slight on it at all. There's no looking down the nose at it just because it doesn't follow traditional wisdom. Who could fault Lord Buddha for coming at a time, 550 years BC, and seeing that the people really, that the scriptures weren't available to them anymore in a pure form, and so he came up with the Four Noble Truths, and it's his own way of formulating. So Buddhism is in a Nastika tradition. It doesn't take its authority from the Vedas. And that's basically what you see here, which is a repeat of last week where we left off. Astika, orthodox systems, and Nastika, non-orthodox systems. Orthodox systems admit the existence of God. Not even just to admit it, but they actually stand up and teach about the presence of existence with a capital E. That is Sat, Chit, Ananda. Sat is existence with a capital E. It's also a word for truth, reality. And then Chit is highest wisdom, and then Ananda is highest bliss. So Sat, Chit, Ananda is one of the most profound words in India for divine reality. Like I say, you don't have to necessarily use God or something like that. You could just say Sat, Chit, Ananda or say divine reality, and you're admitting the existence of something that is the core of your foundation of your own existence. It is existence. So the non-orthodox systems and the orthodox systems cannot really describe that. It's indescribable, so they point to it with these darshanas. Darshana means a way of clear seeing. And these darshanas happened throughout India's history for thousands and thousands of years pre-Christian era, before the Christian era, BCE. And they were flowing as rivers of wisdom, traditional wisdom, with their own scriptures and their own founders and their own avatars for time out of mind. It's been there. So it's very impressive when you look at it even historically. But when you begin to look at it philosophically, then you begin to get the real gist or depth of it. We know just from the people in this room and the people who are watching, many of them on the live streaming today, that Vedanta is one of those orthodox systems. And it's the one that Vivekananda brought here in 1893 and bestowed upon us. Said, you should all learn the Vedanta. Vedanta is more contemporary in many respects. That is, Vedas have been there forever, but Upanishads haven't. They're a little bit more current. Vedavyas gathered the last of them, and that's where we might as well show this chart again really quickly while we look at the Astika and Nastika. I showed it last week, but you can see the four Vedas, this one with its two divisions, that is Rig Veda and Yajur Veda, and the Sama Veda and the Atharva Veda. And each one of those has its collection of Upanishads. Upanishads happened after the Vedas in a fourth level of teaching. That is, first were the rites and rituals, and then the songs, and then the teachings of renunciation, forest dweller teachings, where you went away from society and dwelled apart from it and contemplated the scriptures all the time. That were three stages of life there, and also three stages of history. And then finally you came to these beings who got realization from this process. See, it went by stages over time. And then the real insights came for about 500 years period, they say, when the Upanishads were given out by the beings who had studied the Vedas, sung the songs, taken the teachings, gone into a renunciate phase with them, away from society, in a cave, under a tree, in the wilderness, however you want, and thought about them very deeply and realized them as true. and passed them on to their children then. Then you started having the Upanishads come out. Oh, Daddy, oh, Mommy, you've obviously got so much wisdom. Why haven't you written it down? So finally they had to break their own rule, never to write it down, and began to come up with these transmissions. A lot of them were spoken first, verbal transitions, right to the child. So you didn't, like we're doing now, let's just throw books out and put them on computers, you see. You didn't do away with the original tradition. The books were very important, the scriptures were very important. You had a relationship with them. They were a part of your senses. You could hold them and you could read them with eyes. And then you had this combination of your father or grandfather or grandmother saying these scriptures to you and you repeating them back, sentence by sentence. And that would input them into your mind, and then they would do the commentary on each sentence, on each sloka, and then you would repeat the commentary. So it was very much like they teach music in India. You play a note on the flute, your teacher plays a note on the flute, you play the note on the flute back. And no, that's not quite good. And then they adjust the way you play it, and the tone, the length, the duration, the embouchure, and everything is learned by one note first. You can't even go on and play music yet, you see. You think you can just, let's pick up the flute and start playing, so you want the quick fix and you want to get straight to the fruits. But it's more very slow and very exacting how to actually think a tone before you play it. It doesn't even start with the lips resting on the flute or the bow resting on the violin. It starts with thinking the music first, see, knowing it first. Thought is father to the deed. So you are going to want to approach all of these arts, no matter what level they fall at, Paravidya or Aparavidya, higher wisdom or lower wisdom, by knowing them with the mind first. And then you engage in action and the whole process is smooth. A rain cloud of virtues can happen quicker. Remember that teaching from last week too, or a week before, about Kaivalya. That's another one of these aspects on the pillar, Kaivalya. So you want to be able to put all of this into your memory so that you will have it forever. It's called a divine memory. Some people come back to the body and they have a divine memory, not just of scripture, but even of having samadhi in a previous lifetime, or being a monk, or having awakened to spiritual truths that's already there in their mind, so it's easy to call forth again. So we're thinking of a continuum all the time, not just matter and energy that are in a continuum here. Thought and energy are also in a continuum. Intellect, intelligence, and mind are also in a continuum. And higher mind and lower mind are also in a continuum. So if that be the case, then we ought to get on board. Like we were saying this morning, someone asked, how do you get off the circles of birth and death, the wheels of birth and death? I said, by trading in old wheels for new. See, you get off of the wheel of suffering and sin and transgression and misery and all that, and you replace it with the wheel of morality. And then when morality and immorality get too much for you, you get off the wheel of morality onto the wheel of dharma, teachings. You don't judge yourself and say, I'm good, I'm bad, or I was good yesterday and I'm bad today. You put all that aside and you just sit there and say, there's the river of teachings. I think I'll let it wash over me, and maybe I'll quit brooding about good and bad after that. And I'll just think about what's better. And then from bad to good, and from good to better, and from better to best. Vivekananda says, you want to go from good to better to best. Well, that's those wheels that you're on. So you finally get off the wheel of better, which is dharma, the wheel of practice, sadhana. And that's the best wheel you can get on, because you yourself are in charge of your own destiny then. You're cutting yourself in the image. No God is going to do it for you. No devil is going to keep you from it. You yourself man your own ship. And you sail it across the ocean of existence under your own steam. That's called mastery. And you're going to have to get body, energy, called prana, mind, intellect, and ego all together on the same page. And that page is Atman, and that's in the book called Brahman. See? Divine reality is non-dual. I and my Father are one, that thou art. And so that's the end of all wheels. So that's not such a long answer to a question, how do I get off the wheel of birth and death, is it? It's just pretty much 4 or 5 steps. Or you could just put it in terms of from good to better to best. So the Upanishads are all about that then. You see, I can't resist reading once more the beautiful teaching that's there, that Vivekananda gave us. Sober-minded beings have become disgusted with superstitious religion and are looking to India for new light. How eagerly they take in any little bit of the grand thoughts of the holy Vedas, which resist and are unharmed by the terrible onslaughts of modern science. The theories of creation out of nothing, a created soul, and a big tyrant of a god sitting on a throne in a place called heaven, and of eternal hellfires have disgusted the educated. And the noble thoughts of the Vedas about the eternity of creation and the divinity of the soul, they are imbibing fast in one shape or another. It's just so beautiful to hear that said. It's not like many of us haven't already found that out, have already made our way towards the wisdom traditions and away from fundamentalism, and discarded such, as my teacher used to say, inappropriate, how did he say it, untenable, unacceptable tenets like hellfire, eternal hellfire, and 7-day creation theory. If you take them symbolically, yes, they have a place, but to take them literally, no. What you want to take literally is the teachings of the eternity of creation, the teaching of the divinity of the soul, that it's not sinful by nature, it's perfect by nature. It's the mind that becomes sinful, not the soul. And when the mind becomes sinful, it can also rescue itself, and needs to rescue itself from those transgressions under its own steam. So, from one wheel to the next, you have to make this journey. And that's going to be under your mastery of your energy, prana, breathing is part of that, and sitting, learning to sit in one position, not many hundreds of positions, twisting yourself like a pretzel or like an old dried up tree. One position is what you need, one breath or absence thereof, in the case of kumbhaka or samadhi, and then one mind. It's all one. One position, one breath, one mind, and one great fact, one great truth that will set you free. And so, yes, everything is leading you back to the most economical of all attainments. So Christ, Buddha, those were beings with the most economy in them. They were most practical, most straight to the point, and as exemplars too, they were that. So you get a whole bunch of great souls together in India, you see, that doesn't happen very often. You don't find a whole bunch of really illumined souls together. You find a bunch of church fathers or a bunch of apostles, or but it's very rare to get a bunch of illumined souls together in one culture in one period of time. Although there's more periods of time here. But you could see then that's only proof of how it evolves, how it spreads, how it exudes, how it blossoms. See, this lotus they talk about, the symbolic lotus, you see, until it's got 1,000 petals. And Lord Brahma himself is taking seat on it, or better yet, Padma is taking seat on it. Sri Lakshmi, Divine Mother, like that, is taking her seat on it, you see. And then basically you've got many illumined souls in knowledge of her, instead of billions and billions of souls in ignorance of their true nature. So, to show this and to read this great quote by Vivekananda as a repeat from last week lets us know what the Vedanta here, Uttara Mimamsa of Vedavyas, the Vedanta, is really based upon. Is it just a mere highfalutin philosophy? Or is it based upon scriptural knowledge? Shabda, it's called. It's one of the proofs of existence that we'll talk about later today. Shabda, testimony of the scriptures. See, that's even if you take it out of the realm of scripture and put it in the realm of TVs and websites and computers and so forth, everyone is relying on verbal testimony. Shabda means verbal testimony. It's just a matter of who's the authority here. You see, what level of verbal testimony is being accepted, or does the culture or the individual mind have the acumen to be able to judge higher knowledge and lower knowledge, to be able to see the distinction between that which is essential and that which is non-essential. We call that viveka in our tradition, discrimination between the real and the unreal. So if you have that, then verbal testimony is going to be very valuable to you. We'll talk more about that later. Now, to complete this chart, because it's not that vast of a study, and we've mentioned already one of the orthodox systems just now, Uttara Mimamsa of Vedavyas. Last week we also showed these. One of them that's familiar to everyone is yoga. When we say yoga, remember we want to point specifically to the eight-limbed yoga, not to the current craze of hatha yoga, which is pretty much all physical. And that's just one very small element of the picture. But the Raja Yoga, or the Patanjala Yoga, or the Ashtanga Yoga, those are actually names for the same yoga, eight-limbed, royal, and founded by Patanjali. You can pick your title for it there. But if you say Ashtanga Yoga, eight-limbed yoga, and you know what the eight limbs are, because I've attended upon people teaching yoga classes who call it Ashtanga Yoga and they're only doing one limb, and I asked them, where are the other seven limbs? Do you know what Ashta means? Like Ashtanga Marga, the eightfold path of Buddha, or the Ashtanga Yoga, the eight-limbed yoga of Patanjali. You have to know these things. And if you do, you'll know what the higher limbs are. And you won't settle for just the trunk or sitting around lazily at the foot of the tree, never climbing. You'll start to climb, and you'll begin to work your way toward that fifth limb. That fifth limb is called pratyahara. It means being able to detach yourself from the objects of the senses, especially as they appear in your mind in meditation. If you can do that, if you can take your mind off of form, then the sixth, seventh, and eighth limbs and samyama is called, are more of an open book to you. Concentration, meditation, and samadhi, called samadhi being here, see, listed. So how do we get to samadhi? By stages again, by limbs. And what's the greatest impediment? For the ordinary person, getting rid of attachment to the body, hatha, is the hardest impediment. But for the wiser person, pratyahara is going to be the main problem in yoga. Or you might say first, getting a hold of your prana, and then using it to master pratyahara level. That is, that with my prana, I get more interested in inward things. And therefore, I can begin to take my mind off of external objects. Now I only have to accost the inner worlds and the inner objects and transcend those. So that's all well known in Ashtanga Yoga. So this particular darshana is very popular nowadays. We want to maybe not popularize, but make it familiar with everyone about these other seven limbs of yoga, not just the physical side. Especially the first two, called yamas and niyamas. We want people to know the importance of truth, satyam. We want them to practice ahimsa, nonviolent, because that would be, that's not being practiced in the West at all, in our government, in our business. Competition is a kind of violence against others. Anything that doesn't ameliorate, that is, heal rifts between souls and make them get behind and support each other, that's nonviolence. Not just whether I eat meat or not, which is another consideration. You might want to treat your fellow creatures around you and the environment better if you want to practice nonviolence to the hilt. Or even look into Jainism. It's one of the unorthodox systems here, right? Jainism of Mahavir, or the Tirthankaras. 24 Tirthankars or so that went way back in time before Buddha. So Jainism and its nonviolence is very, very exquisite, and probably a better word for it than saying extreme, like making sure you don't kill a bug and not even breathe a microbe. Well, there are reasons for those things that aren't just about birth and death, because Jainism was raised in India and it knows that the soul is birthless and deathless. So even knowing that, they're going to be very, very nonviolent. And it's a part of the yamas and niyamas of yoga, you see. You don't want any karma to accrue from acts done in the body. Acts done outside the body, after you're free, they're not going to impede you. See, they're not going to make no never mind. But acts done here in the body under the rules of relativity, karma, those impede everyone. There's a karma that's always to be paid by taking on the body. Holy Mother said that. You must pay the amount to the last farthing of taking on the physical body. Everyone who enters into it has to pay to the last farthing. So its embodiment is then something to be encountered again on the level of violence or nonviolence. Do I want to take this body nonviolently and not subject anyone else to any kind of violence? One of my favorite sayings in the Gita is, that one who does not afflict the world and whom the world cannot afflict, that one is my precious child. Krishna says. He does not afflict the world and the world cannot afflict him. See? So he keeps his, how do they saying nowadays? The spaces, you see. They respect the space of others. And they keep everything at a distance. See? Basically, you want to embrace the whole world in your love, but you don't want to embrace their ignorance. That cannot be done. See? Ignorance can be taken on and paid for, like the avatars do, but it's not something that they want to do. Shiva didn't want to drink the poison of relativity that turned his throat blue. He had to, because the poison had gotten so bad it was eating through the foundation of all the worlds. But Divine Mother was there to save him. She pressed on his throat so the poison wouldn't get into his digestive system and destroy him. So, yes, we want to love all beings. May the Lord save all beings, but may the Lord save me from their ignorance. That is something we do not want to take on. We want to remain in a state of non-dual awareness, in higher wisdom. And the Dharma is helping us do that. The Dharma will be our floodgate. See, close it and open it as you will. Close it against samsara pragbara, the dam of ignorance, and open it to koivalya pragbara, the flow of wisdom. That's a teaching from the most ancient of all these darshanas, Sankhya Yoga. Now, of these darshanas, you have three that are currently available to you: Vedanta, Yoga, and Sankhya. Those three of the six are on the scene. Probably the one that's mostly on the scene is Vedanta, because yoga, as I say, is not being studied as an 8-limb system so much as it is as just a form of body craze right now, attachment to the body and attachment to physical health. So what's really on the scene now is Vedanta here, and then the Nastika Buddhism is on the scene. Vedanta and Buddhism, if I could paraphrase Swami Vivekananda, says there is no difference between them. Vedanta and Buddhism teach the same things. The differences will just be in words and this difference, astika, nastika. See, one takes the Vedas literally and takes them, the truth of them, and uses them to transmit the Dharma, and the Buddhist path goes towards the Four Noble Truths, but the same kinds of things that Vedanta is teaching too are in the Four Noble Truths. The same kind of reincarnation process that's in Buddhism as the 12 links is there in the Vedanta and in its explication of karma and reincarnation. And the interdependence of all things, interdependent arising, and how to get free of it is also there both in Vedanta and Buddhism. So the Ashtaka Nastika principle is not a rub. It's not something for competition or for debate. There's something to recognize as existing in different time periods. Buddhism being fairly recent, 550 years before Christ, is very recent compared to Kapila's Sankhya, which was thousands of years before that. Yet Buddha was born in Kapilavastu, Kapila's birthplace. That was where he was born, which is now, I think, a part of Nepal rather than a part of India, because the borders have changed. Such is Maya. But nonetheless, you can't take away that fact that Sankhya Yoga is very ancient and teaches those precious truths of Purusha, the sentient soul, and Prakriti, the insentient energy, nature energy. See, those two are separate abiding realities that are connected to one another. So it's a very qualified dualistic kind of philosophy that laid the foundation for teachings that yoga, Buddhism, and Vedanta were later to give us. That's how important it is. Now these other three are a lot of them have been worked into Vedanta already. The Purva Mimamsa of Jaimini and the Nyaya and the Vaisheshika of Kannada, of Gautama and Kannada. You'll find a lot of those worked into Vedanta already, and there's a good segue into Pramana, because a lot of the teachings of Nyaya and Vaisheshika are there in the proofs of reality. That's where you'll find a lot of the distilled teachings of Gautama and Kannada still there, as if Vedanta just sort of borrowed them and interlaced them with what was going on, took the essence out of those two darshanas and worked them into its fold. But before we go there, and we already read the quote last week, it bears repeating too. Basically, everyone has borrowed from Mother India throughout long phases of time, as there has been an endless sweep of religious philosophies and pathways emanating from her. In other words, not just one sacred book or one single prophet, but many, many of each. And within this plethora of spiritual avenues, there has always been room for those who profess the existence of divine reality, as well as those who do not care to admit it or emphasize it. In other words, sometimes it gets in the way to always have to mention God. God becomes a word bantered around commonly, as if you were bargaining for fascia greens in the marketplace, like Mother says. You cannot speak Brahman. You can only point to it, which is what these proofs of religion are about. They're pointers towards the existence of Brahman without saying anything about the existence of Brahman. In Buddhism, for instance, Buddha was asked, does God exist? And he said, did I say God existed? Then, does God not exist? And he said, did I say God doesn't exist? So he was non-committal as to the existence of God. You have in Judaism and in Islam a great reticence to even give a name to reality. So we have Jehovah and we have Yahweh and we have Allah, but very sparse as far as any kind of name, and very tentative about pinning a name to reality, because it's nameless and formless. Even the Vedanta says that out the gate, you see. So you have to be very careful about that so that people don't get turned off, and more importantly, probably philosophically, they don't begin to assign form to the formless reality. That's really the problem, is that then you begin to talk nonsense like gods and devils and angels and ancestors and all of these things, which have a place of existence in the mind, but which are not the reality. They're forms. And then pretty soon you end up wanting to go to the realm of your ancestors called heaven. Why would you want to do that? It's no different than here. Your ancestors are here too, and you're enjoying and suffering here too. Do you think heaven is a place of more enjoyment and less suffering? Not when you have to come back out of it. See? Because you go to heaven and you return to earth. That's been a clear teaching in Buddhism and in Vedanta, in yoga and in Samkhya from the very get-go, long before Christ visited this earth in that particular form. So we have to look more toward these wisdom traditions to clear things like this up for us, so that philosophically we're sound. That's what these darshanas and these proofs do for us, which is what we're entering into, in case you haven't noticed it, today and this afternoon after the break. Before the break, though, let's try and complete this chart. So we've looked at the orthodox systems and mentioned them. They admit the existence of God, but the asterisk here on Samkhya means that Kapila never really admitted the existence of God. Samkhya was very non-committal, one of those darshanas that was very non-committal. He just mentioned Purusha, the eternal soul, and Prakriti, the eternal material energy principle. One was sentient, the other was insentient. And then how the two interact with each other, Purusha with Prakriti, was the rub, you see, was the potential problem. Suffering comes out of that. Remember, pleasure is a kind of suffering. So India has always known this. If you have a duality, then you're ping-ponging back and forth between it, good and bad, pleasure and pain, life and death. It goes on forever in relativity, so you're not really in a state of absolute peace yet, absolute bliss yet, absolute wisdom, non-duality. You don't know what that is yet. That's precisely why you don't give a name to it. You have to kind of know it first, and you can say, oh, it is I. Let's just call it by one letter. It is myself. See? Like Vivekananda said beautifully, I'm a Vedantist. I hardly know any other God anywhere than myself. See? So he probably said hardly because he had met Sri Ramakrishna, his guru. So being a Vedantist, you know the self is God. I and my Father are one, and you're coming out the gate with that. You see, like it's the racehorse, the racetrack. You see, you come out the gate, right? And there's all these different factions, but one of them is the winner. Like, who was it that said? I was just speaking to one of the teenage students of SRV on the email the other day, and I remembered that quote of Heraclitus, one of the Roman or Greek philosophers, that said, "There of 100 men, 10 should never have been there in the first place." They mucked the thing up, you see. And then, you know, another percentage of those men, 9 of them maybe are warriors, and one of those, you know, is, and the 10th one is like the great soul who comes back and saves everyone. I'm paraphrasing Heraclitus, but it's this idea that these beings that come out the gate with ignorance are just making a mess of everything for everyone and leaving garbage behind. But these 9 that fight the battle, and then this one that leads the battle, those are the ones that come out the gate with the knowledge of themselves as the Purusha. I'm the indweller in the city with 9 gates. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 apertures in the body. Purusha. See? So I'm the indweller that operates the senses. And the senses have their relationship with Prakriti, the objects, nature. But the observer stays apart from the process of Purusha and Prakriti. The soul and its preoccupation with, its identification with, or better, its association with, because there's all 3 levels there. People get completely attached and forget themselves. Other people get mixed up and then extricate themselves. And that's the 9 that fight, right? But this one who stays as the observer to the whole thing, Purusha and Prakriti, you know, that would be Atman, or the seer, the Sakshi Bhutam, the witness of all phenomena, totally detached and in a state of bliss all the time, like an old warrior who quit the battle and sat on the top of the hill, and the only interest he had was seeing who won, you see, and then seeing who the winner become evil and turn against another army, and then they become the loser, you see. They just watch this whole play of Maya go on back and forth, and nothing really gets distilled out of it. It's all vanity and vexation of spirit. But he doesn't care because he's not a part of it, see. He's observing. Every once in a while, if he wants to help souls who show the right attitude, who are interested in the Dharma, come out, teach them. Take a body, see. And that's going to be at a great price for all involved. But yet that's the best thing to do if you're going to be embodied, is to help people get free. Free from what? Free from ignorance. Why? Because it causes suffering. So that's my explanation of out the gate. You see, even before you start into the race of Maya, if you're holding on to this knowledge of Brahman, I am, my Father are one, this self is Brahman, then you're fine. You see, you can take as many incarnations as you want, as some of these, even souls living today, have been doing. So something there about this Samkhya asterisk, you see. The asterisk is about Kapila's non-committalness about the existence of reality. He did mention Purusha, however. In yoga, much the same way, hardly mentions anything about God, but he does mention Ishvara, the Supreme Soul. So from those small mentions from these great souls like Kapila and Patanjali, we infer that they're orthodox, they're Nastika. They do know somewhere inside of them and affirm the divine nature of reality. Whereas hard to find proof of that in Jainism and Buddhism. They're focused on something other than trying to prove the existence of God. It is its own proof, in other words, I think, is what Lord Buddha was saying when he said that he didn't mention God exists, and nor did he affirm its non-existence. That's basically the idea. Now, just when we reached the end of the clock last week, we were about ready to classify the scriptures. Now, we already classified the scriptures a little bit with the idea of Vedanta. Vedanta is all this. That is Veda and Anta. Veda is the four Vedas, which are the main scriptures of India, and Anta means the Upanishads. So this chart pretty much shows you everything scripturally that is in the Vedanta. 108 Upanishads left. There must have been hundreds and hundreds more before the end of that age when Vedavyas, who is now called the father of Vedanta, you see right here, Uttara Mamamsa Vedavyas, grabbed onto those final 108 and kept them on record, writ them down. So Vedanta has that. Now in the Yoga Sutras we have what we've been studying lately over the last, I think, 5 to 10 years we've been in it, the Yoga Sutras. And those are pretty much the mead of the yogi as far as scripture is concerned in the darshana of yoga. So each one of these have their scriptures. Samkhya, the scriptures are almost gone. They're so ancient that we only have one, maybe two left. And actually SRV comes together and has retreats on Samkhya Yoga. I think we have one next year even coming up. And we take one of the scriptures of the remaining scriptures of Samkhya and study it and go through all the teachings of that. I think I've created about 10 charts for the Samkhya system. That's where for the Vedanta I've created about 150 or more. So that's how ancient and rare the Samkhya is for teachings. Now, as far as classification of scriptures, there's Shruti, which means to hear. Or, let's put it this way, it must be heard. They want you to hear the Upanishads because those are the testaments of the seers who had the insight called realization that turned them into enlightened beings. So you must hear the Upanishads. They're very important in that. That's Vedas, Upanishads, and Gita. There's another one you could put in there called the Brahma Sutras, and there are a few others more current called Ashtavakra Samhita, Avadhuta Gita. They all fall under this heading, I believe, of Shruti, that must be heard, that must be read, that must be studied. Read and studied is good. Best is to hear them from the lips of an illumined soul and then take them into your mind, manana, as I said, and work them around in your mind over a long period of time. That qualifies you for these darshanas. And you have to do that with each one. If you're a Buddhist, you're going to have to look into all the scriptures and sutras and spend some time with them and imbibe the teachings. Best doing it from a lama or a Rinpoche or that kind of thing. And same from a Roshi in Zen Buddhism, as today is Zen Buddhist Day. So those are important for qualification. Now, there's Smriti. That means the Itihasa, the Puranas, and the Agamas, and the Tantras, the Darshanas, and the Dharma Shastras. All of these are levels of Itihasa. Itihasa is third nature. Smriti is secondary. Shruti is primary. The third nature doesn't mean that it's of any less importance. Really, what it means is it's more easily understandable for most people. Itihasa means scriptural history, basically. And by going back and hearing the stories of Ram and Sita and Hanuman and Lakshmana and Ravana in the Ramayana, for instance, that's Itihasa. But you'll find a version of the Ramayana called the Adhyatma Ramayana, in which all of the extra has been taken out, and it's been, the storyline is still there, but it's been formed into a condensed version which keeps all the non-dual teachings of the Ramayana. This is exactly an Upanishad then, so really you could call Adhyatma Ramayana an Upanishad of the Shruti kind. That's how you could say Itihasa and Shruti exist side by side and work off of each other. It's never a matter of classifying in levels to prove superiority or inferiority of something, see. It's more a matter of taking it apart and looking at it, and each one being a complementary of the others. Prati Tantra Siddhanta is a way of taking the scriptures apart so that you can argue about which one is better and which one's worse. It's never a very good way to go. But Sahaja Tantra Siddhanta is a way of uniting them and using them as parts of a working whole. See, you only take them apart to see their individual contributions, then you put them back together and watch the whole thing roll. See, it's a comprehensive way of approaching philosophy. And in between that is a kind of siddhanta or conclusion that means let's pose one religion, bring them all together and try and unite them, you see, or try and make them friendly with one another. And that's also not a superior way. It's rather ad nauseum nowadays to try and bring together these religions. And it may be a stage of things, but you should see them as facets of the same diamond. When you're looking at these 6 darshanas, there's no doubt that the Vedanta has the advantage, Yuttara Mimamsa has the advantage of having non-duality fully developed and on its side, whereas back in the ancient times, Samkhya of Kapila probably didn't have that advantage. And it was working with a level of mind and a culture at that period of time that needed to hear other things. One of the greatest things about Samkhya is that it does propose two-ness, that the soul and nature are 2 different realities. Now that's a rub as far as non-duality is concerned. You don't want to, you can't put nature and soul together like oil and water and try and mix it up. It's going to separate. So, but isn't that pretty much why the Samkhya is so valuable to us? Because it does allow us to separate the two and study them as individual realities, or in order so that we find out that nature has come out of the soul. How would we have found that out if we hadn't have cleared the field like Kapila did and made it obvious that there was a sentient principle and an insentient principle? And pretty much that is the Advaita of Samkhya, as far as I'm concerned. The very fact that he did that wasn't proof that he was trying to prove 2 different realities. It was he was trying to take them apart to show that one came out of the other, that nature comes out of you, that the universe comes out of mind, that objects come out of intelligence. So there's a forerunner to everything that's in form. That, to me, is the real efficacy of studying the Samkhya deeply and over again, to remind yourself of that. So there you see Puranas, Agamas, which are really the Tantras, another name for them, the Darshanas and the Dharma Shastras, very important teachings that you'll get if you frequent circles, satsang in sanghas, sangha means a spiritual circle, and especially in Indian circles, Indian philosophy, Vedanta and so forth, yoga, you'll begin to hear shlokas, sutras, and wisps of knowledge out of the Dharma Shastras, out of the Tantras, out of the Agamas and so forth, or the Puranas. And you'll wonder at the breadth and depth of Vedanta. But what you're seeing there is really a lot of other things that are also have been requisitioned, you see, and have been brought into the greater, sometimes what we're calling nowadays Neo-Vedanta, the new Vedanta that Vivekananda has brought forward to us. So I think enough about the top half of this chart. I've tried to make it as readily available and as inspiring as I can. Of course, the real inspiration is in you reading them and applying your own consciousness to them, because that makes them live. They have come out of the consciousness of the seers, and so then your own consciousness will also shed light on them. Now, if we talk about the Vedas, and we look at the Vedanta specifically, this bottom half of the chart I put together called the Vedas, and there are two divisions. One's called the Karma Kanda, and one is called the Jnana Karma. Karma Kanda is the various acts. There you see them here. The Samhitas are the collection of mantras and hymns. They correspond with youthful stage. That is where you're practicing celibacy as a brahmacharya. And that, of course, is acknowledged as a stage in the East. But in America, when I was growing up through the 50s, 60s, and 70s, all the youth pretty much were sort of on their own honor system to practice celibacy, but not necessarily everyone was doing it. But it wasn't put forward as something that you did as a stage of life, a celibate student life, where you studied scriptures and observed the yamas and niyamas to the letter, and therefore qualified yourself at the level of the first two limbs of yoga. We don't have that kind of teaching as we're growing up in the West, so there's then a lot of, how they say, stray bullets flying around our society in the case of many souls who didn't get these clarifying teachings. So the Samhitas are a kind of portion of the Karma Kanda. Karma means the path of action, is what you're, as compared to or correlated with sometimes Jnana Karma, the path of wisdom. So the Samhitas, those early mantras and hymns that we discussed about the Vedas, they correspond with the early brahmacharya stage. Now the Brahmanas, sacrificial rites, duties, modes of conduct, corresponds with the grihastha stage. That is, pretty much you could call that making a living stage, merchant, grihastha. So they also have to do sacrificial rites, they have to keep up religious duties, and they have to observe modes of conduct. So this is how the four caste system in India lasted so long. Nowadays it's like, oh, let's criticize it because the fifth caste came along and the fourth caste system broke down. But you should start looking at thousands of years previous to the breakdown of the caste system and how long that stayed in place and how wonderful a principle it was in India, how it kept India's scriptures, for instance, still available for us and pure. See, they weren't interpolated. So that kind of internal purity that is there is basically due to the brahmacharyas and the grihastas, that is, people in business and youth, practicing sacrificial rites and doing their duties and observing modes of conduct like the yamas and niyamas. That keeps the society from deteriorating for a long, long time, we should say. Now, Samhitas, first part of Vedanta, Brahma, that is the Vedas, Brahmanas, second part, Aranyakas were the third part. I mentioned them, forest dwellers, is the word they kind of borrow from that, or Vanaprastha. We like to bring out vanaprastha if we're not monks particularly, because that's the fourth stage, jnana karma. Khanda is the monastic stage, basically, generally speaking. But we like to bring out the teaching of vanaprastha for people who are the forest dwellers of contemporary times. That is, many of us are living on the periphery of society and just working with society from a detached way. That is, we're probably not going to parties and, and drinking and smoking and doing the things that society is doing out there, because we've found a finer nectar to imbibe than alcohol and various things like that. Our intoxicants are different than theirs, so put it that way. We have developed this taste for the fine wine of scripture and historical scripture. All of the scriptures mentioned here, and what they reflect and how they came out of the minds of the seers, is all just this invisible to most people Dharma. When you come upon the Dharma, remember you've gotten off the wheel of morality and immorality, and you had to get onto that wheel by giving up transgressions, worldliness, mundane human convention, transgressions, evil doings, and so forth. Those were wheels that you got off on until you got onto this wheel of Dharma. So the Dharma is practically invisible to a greater percentage of people, but yet that's the secret of people living in peace. That's the secret of peace of mind. That's the secret of a dharmic life, is to be aware of this invisible teaching that's going on a different level of consciousness than most people are operating at. So you're going to have to raise yourself up out of that level of consciousness. I know this by direct experience because I have students that I see move from worldliness closer to spirituality, and they do it by steps, and finally some of them succeed in actually sloughing off, like a snake does its skin, the problem of worldliness, and they begin to get tired of their old ways of life, their old habits. They become world weary. That's actually a word that's used in the scriptures, and it doesn't satisfy them anymore to be doing the same things they were doing. So they need to have somewhere to go, and that's when the teachings and the teachers are there for them, and the Sangha members are there for them to usher them into this higher level of consciousness. It's very precious, and it's worth keeping. That alone is worth keeping the Dharma going. What to speak of just you enjoying it on some other level. We have ours, devil take the hindmost kind of idea. Yes, we do. We can leave the world behind, and will, when it's time. Or maybe we already have, and like a vanaprastha, we're just dwelling on the periphery of it and helping it as we can from a detached place. So some words of contemporary vanaprastha stage, which are going to be householders that have either had no children, or their children have grown up, been taught, and left the fold, left the family, and they're on their own. And maybe these beings also own no property, like monks, and so money is not their main preoccupation. They can subsist on what comes just naturally without investing too much in politics, business, and merchant stage and all that. And so they can just remain in this kind of subtle level, kind of precarious level of maintaining themselves just outside of society. That's a vanaprastha. So if you have not found yourself to be either a householder or a monk, there's a middle way there that you can probably begin to adopt and adapt to, and call yourself a vanaprastha. So that's very important teaching for this particular time in America. It says here, inner meaning of the brahmanas and rules for forest dwellers. So you're going to have to know the inner meaning of the sacrifices, but not necessarily have to do them anymore. You're going to have to know the inner meaning of the duties and the rites and rituals, but not necessarily engage in them anymore. That is, you can take them or leave them because you know the inner meaning of them. So if you have learned the puja, how to worship God with form and images, now you can do it in your mind. You don't have to do it at the altar anymore, although you might go on doing that just as an example to others. But basically everything is now going on in your mind. That's a vanaprastha stage. And you're able to distill the nectar of wisdom out of that process in your mind. So it's not poison exuding anymore that you have to worry about. It's nectar exuding, and you have to learn how to distribute it to people. Here, you take a little bit of this nectar. Here, you take some. Here, you take some. And take it on the level that you can digest it, you see. No, you can't have any. Sorry, you're not ready. See? I'm looking at a blank space here because all these people are imbibing. So basically, that's one of the arts there at the level of the Aranyakas or the Vanaprasthan. You could spend a lot of time on that particular stage because a lot of people who are in their 50s and 60s are actually heading somewhere, and it's a way of defining, if you will, where they're heading, rather than just saying, oh, I don't have children and responsibilities anymore, so I can, paint pottery. Now, I always wanted to do that, see, or I can join my bingo club, you see, or whatever, but now, actually I have somewhere to go that's more like a noble, you see, for an older person. Old age doesn't mean silliness, I hope, and forgetfulness, and Alzheimer's. And so I'll never give way to that. Knock on wood. Come in. So we should never become invested with ideas that I'm sick or I'm diseased just because I'm old. We should be imbibing the Dharma all the time and keeping our minds in a noble place. The mind will live forever. The body can come and go as it wishes. And in fact, the mind, in my tradition, produces as many bodies as it wants because God does not produce bodies. God is formless. Leave it there. Nature produces bodies, and your mind, together with nature, is going to produce the fetus in the womb with the contribution of the sperm of the husband and the egg of the wife. So basically, this is going to be your detached witness position, that you are consciousness alone, and that you come into the body like Kapila said, Purusha into Prakriti, soul into nature, and associate there, and then detach yourself when the time comes. This is a good art form to be engaged in. So you're talking about somebody who is done with student studies, done with rites and rituals and business, and they've come to a place where they want to retire from most activities and place their mind on more noble things, more noble undertakings. And they have the time to do it. Hopefully they've brought their activities to a good, fruitful closure. And then now they can keep engaging in these spiritual rites and rituals that they've been doing ever since they were making money. That is, making money is a kind of sacred ritual, if you do it right. It's called dharmic money. It's not worldly money, it's dharmic money. And you make sure that that's shared amongst certain ends, like raising a dharmic family or supporting spiritual organizations that are teaching the Dharma. Those are all very powerful things. Now, before the break here, which is just a couple minutes away, let's look at the Jnana-khanda. That's the Upanishads, which you see stretched out here over this field. That is this sannyas stage, they call it. The monks, the swamis, for instance, in India, they're called sannyasins, and they're practicing the Jnana-khanda specifically. They've probably been doing that since they were young. It's the secret teaching for those who are ready to renounce the world. It corresponds with the sannyas stage. I could recite for you by memory the 11 or 12 verses of the Song of the Sannyasin if there were time, but it pretty much outlines everything about have thou no home, and no food or drink can taint the noble self that knows itself, and strike off the fetters of chains of birth and death. And there's a whole bunch of very eternal and authentic teachings of non-duality that form the content of the Song of the Sannyasin or the Jnana-khanda. So that, of course, is what we admire when we go to these great teachers who are monks, and learn from them in what they've gleaned from this long, long time spent in study of the scriptures, and with their gurus too. The Guru Parampara lineage, passing on from guru to disciple and disciple to the next disciple and so forth. That is there, very obvious in that line of sannyas. Now let's end here this chart with the final sloka. Lord Brahma was once meditating on his creator, when there was manifest within the shrine of his heart the eternal word Om, the seed of all knowledge and thought. One by one, then came the sounds of all the letters, and through these letters there became known to Brahma the wisdom of the Vedas. He then taught it to his disciples, and these in turn spread it to the many worlds. There are many great teachings around this in the Itihasa, about Lord Brahma sitting in the lotus, and Divine Mother, his creator, coming to him and saying, spread the wisdom now, start the cycle. And she gives him the seed letters, Om, Aim, Hrim, Shrim, Klim, Krim, Hum, Fat, Swaha. All of these basically powerful letters in Sanskrit that are correlated with the creative process, which is really a projection process. So she gives him these, and then he broadcasts them, you see, to his children, his mind-born souls like Vishishta and others. And then they spread it to their disciples, and that begins the trickle-down process, comes on down to the gods and the goddesses, and the gods and goddesses pass it on to the celestials, and the celestials on to the ancestors, and all the way out to humans. Hopefully we get it too. This rainfall of divine nectar, Amrit, that comes from knowledge of the scriptures, that we can qualify ourselves in and then attain the supreme goal, as Buddha said, the gata gata paragata, and reach the supreme goal of human life and existence. So that's a beautiful quote about Lord Brahma and the whole Guru Parampara lineage, how it transmits from station to station, if you will, that is station of consciousness, and will come right on down here in the form of powerful words that get transmitted to people with not only open ears, but open hearts and open minds, the two wings of the bird, Bhakti and Jnanam. So here we will pause for our break, and during the break the live streaming audience can see close up these two charts, and we will go on to talk about the proofs of existence after the break. So stay with us in this 15 or 10 minute break. Namaste. We have returned for the second half of the fourth class of Shakta Advaita Vada, which is a series that you'll be able to find in the not too distant future, not only on the Advaita Academy website live, which is happening all the time when we do this, but stored also on our own website under the YouTube heading. And we have probably quite a few already available. There are 2 or 3 series there, including the intelligent particle and others. The one that's being worked on right now is Advaita of the Avatars, which we did earlier this year. And that's about ready to be rendered and put on the YouTube. So you can always look back on these classes and take them at your own pace. This particular series, Shakta Advaita Vada, will be posted soon, but first we're going to have to complete it, which is what we're doing now in the fourth class, second half. And we have, again, using our main chart here of Mother's various territories, calling the kingdoms of heaven within her. Her own lokas is the word we use in Sanskrit, or sometimes the word akasha or akashas, inner spaces that are subtler, like your dream state or like your deep sleep state. The consciousness goes into a much subtler level, away from gross objects and gross vibrations, and experiences things deeper in the mind. The mind really is not the brain. The mind is the whole kingdom of heaven within you that holds all of these various levels, some of which we mentioned even at the end of the first half, the ancestors and the celestials and the goddesses and so forth. Those are inner kingdoms consisting of a different kind of particle than the atomic particle, and vibrating at a much, much subtler level with the vibration of intelligence. And that's actually how we ended the first half again, is this quote of Lord Brahma meditating and hearing the word inside of him, and then after that he heard the word, and then all of these subtle bijams were given to him one by the Divine Mother of the Universe. So he came to know all the secrets of how the word creates vibration, and how everything is made out of intelligence. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God, is what we're always tempted to quote, how Jesus told it to John. The word meaning origins, but Almighty Father is beyond origins, is how we teach it in Vedanta, so that we're not confusing creation and form with God. Brahma, yes, from the Creator God down, you can allow that, but the absolute God is not in form and does not create, and isn't involved in the processes of creation, preservation, and destruction. Not even in the processes of projection, sustenance, and withdrawal, and not in the processes of birth, life, and death. So no change goes on there, and that's the non-dual emphasis of Vedanta. We looked at that darshana. That's really one of the key principles of the 6 darshanas, why Vedanta is so important amongst the 6 darshanas, the orthodox systems, is that its focus is really on that non-dual nature, formlessness, with a capital S, by the way, a capital F, by the way, because formlessness with a small f relates to unmanifested nature. That is where forms go into formlessness, like dreaming into deep sleep, and then come back out, take forms again. So that's that process, a kind of wheel of birth and death, or a wheel of manifestation and unmanifestation. That all falls under the insentient side of Samkhya, by the way, Prakriti, right? Prakriti, the tip of the iceberg, is manifested Prakriti, and all the bulk of the iceberg that exists beneath the surface is all unmanifested Prakriti. So that's all, both are insentient, but that's a wheel that goes on from manifest to unmanifest all the time. From the baby to the adult to the great-grandfather to death to birth again is all a wheel that's going on, where a person is experiencing a kind of formlessness. But the formlessness that we're talking about, that's with a capital F, called Advaita, the real non-duality, the oneness or the homogeneity of all existence, that's God. as Vedanta defines it. That's Brahman. And it doesn't go through changes or cycles. And it always remains free of transformations and transitions. That's this word, aparinama, that we will get into maybe next week in our class on Sunday. Aparinama means non-transformation, and they assign that to Brahman. Everything else is parinama. It transforms, at least apparently so, even though you really can't keep track of it. That is, you can't count the number of waves that are forming on the ocean. It's infinite. And so that's all the surface of change. And it's impossible to keep track of, so it becomes so hypnotic to even study it or look at it that there might as well be no waves there. Sort of like looking at the wave theory, the wave particle and so forth, and how it changes under the electron microscope. Depends on the mind of the observer, doesn't it? Two observers will see two different things looking at the same particle. So wherever your consciousness happens to be at that given time, the given time in this regard means meditation or action, the different phases that consciousness goes through, waking, dreaming, and deep sleep, then that's going to predicate what you see. And that's all in the realm of transformation, parinama. But aparinama, and I'll show you a nice chart on that when we get to it, is non-transformation, and they assign that to non-dual awareness, or Brahman, we call it in our tradition. That would be how we would define the Almighty Father as Vedantists, and also Allah. And also Buddha nature. The only thing is that this dynamic power, this static power, has a dynamic aspect to it. And that's the snake in its wriggling motion. Sometimes still, sometimes breaks into motion. So that's all in the same snake. So in that same Brahman, there is this potential for movement, for power, shakti it's called. And that's at a very high level. Now, all of this is a verbal testament I'm giving. It's called Shabda, and that falls under the label of Pramana, which is right here next to Astika on the pillar. We studied Astika, the 6 systems of orthodox philosophy. We looked at the Nastika. There are others you could add in there, but that's safe to stay inside of those 2 for now. There are other religious movements in India that also could fall under the Gnostic heading. But then maybe they might argue and say, no, we're Astika, we are traditional. But if you take your authority with the Vedas, then you can truly say we are Astika. Now, as that relates to these darshanas, we've looked at it, but pramana is spread, that is the 6 proofs of truth are spread throughout all of these. And so putting together a chart on it was rather challenging because I found 6 proofs of truth in the Vaisheshika. I won't turn the chart back, but one of those 6 was Vaisheshika, really, if you remember. There are 6 proofs in that particular darshana of the existence of reality. That is, might as well say it, just the existence of God. As silly as it sounds, because God is existence in Vedanta. So you see there, the 6 proofs are on these petals of the lotus. We'll look at that separately, but 6 proofs of reality in Advaita Vedanta are these upper ones above the dotted line. Now the quote here is from the Mother Scripture at the top. I'll read that to you, the Srimad Devi Bhagavatam. I often say that if you want to become more informed about Shaktism, that is Divine Mother reality, you can go to India and go into a certain temple and come out with a red dot on your forehead. It means you've been Shaktized. You see, you've gone into a Divine Mother temple and they've given you a tilaka right there of a red dot, which signifies the opening of the third eye, in order that you see Divine reality as Mother. So if you want to become more informed about Shaktism and become a Shakta, take your refuge under the Divine Mother of the Universe, as the Ramakrishna order devotees do. The Ramakrishna order devotees have a blending of Advaita and Shaktism, and a good helping of Vaishnavism and Shaivism thrown in too. And probably some of them are hidden Buddhists, and and other things too. So it's a universal thing when you say Vedanta. You have to keep it universal. However, when you're looking at it specifically as orthodox and non-orthodox, and you want to go into the systems that try their best to prove their points in philosophy, then this is what you'll come upon. In Advaita Vedanta, there are 6 of them, and they're found in the Mother Scriptures. Isn't that wonderful? Here's where Shakta Advaita Vada becomes a very good title for your series of classes. You actually have a blending of Advaita being given by Mother Path, Shakta Advaita. So this quote is from the Srimad Devi Bhagavatam, which is Mother herself. There are 2 great scriptures, Mother Scriptures in the world, and they're both in India. One's called Srimad Devi Bhagavatam, the other one's called the Sri Durga Saptasati, or more popularly known as the Chandi. Chandi is very short, 700 mantrams. The Srimad Devi Bhagavatam is very thick, hundreds and thousands of mantrams. So here's that quote. Priests, pundits, and other knowers of the Vedas worship various gods, but the Maharshis, the Maharishis, say that as the one Ganges manifests herself through many flowing channels, so too does the one Mahashakti express herself in all the Deva and Devi forms. To come to know this supreme Mahadevi, the Great Mother, the best knowers of truth advise utilizing the various proofs of existence of Brahman. So this is stated in the Mother Scripture that when the priests and pundits and philosophers want to really come closer to the truth of existence, pramana, proof of what their heart tells them, of what their mind tells them, of what their beliefs are, of what their feelings are, of what their intuitions are, and they want it in very didactic terms, very straightforward, then they're going to come and study these proofs of reality. They're sometimes accused of being rather dry. I don't think so. I think they're wet with the knowledge of Divine Mother Wisdom. They're moist, and you just need to see them in the right way. In fact, before we do that, since we've just quoted from the Mother Scripture, let's sing a little bit to her so that we prepare ourselves for that kind of divine wetness or moistness. Jaya Jagadambe Site Radhe Gauri Durge Namo Namo Jaya Jagadambe Site Radhe Gauri Durge Namo Namo Jaya Jagadambe Site Radhe Gauri Durge Namo Namo Jaya Jagadambe Site Radhe Gauri Durge Namo Namo. And onwards through these various verses to the Divine Mother of the Universe. Jaya Jagadambe. Jagat means world. Jagadambe means the overseer of all the worlds, the one who holds all the worlds. Jagadatri is another word for her. And then it goes on saying Sita, which is Rama's beloved, Radha, which is Krishna's beloved, and Gauri and Durga, which are the consorts of Shiva. And Namo Namo, we pay our obeisances. So a very simple, beautiful bhajan, almost a call and response chant. You can use it as a kirtan to the Divine Mother of the Universe. Jaya simply means victory. So when they want to know the truth that she teaches, and then they enter it through this devotion to her by singing these ancient chants. And then they begin teaching or looking into the teachings of Arthapati, Anupalabdhi, Upamana, Shabda, Anumana, and Pratyaksha. Those are the 6 that are listed at the top of the dotted line. Now, before we enter into it, let's look at the root of the word pramana. Pramana really means proof. That's why I chanted at the beginning of this class just a little while ago, Om Vedanta Siddhanta Niruktiresha Brahmaiva Jivaham Sakalam Jagad Cha Akanda Rupa Stitir Eva Moksho Advaita and then Pramana. The next line states about Pramana. The proof of divine reality, the absolute conclusion, is that all of this is Brahman. Shruti is also mentioned there. See, Shruti means, if you remember back on the first chart, to hear the truths of the non-dual scriptures happens first, then Smriti, then Itihasa. So to hear those great statements, Mahavakyas, that a mother has decreed as being the essence of non-duality, this self is Brahman, and so forth, then you have to have a pramana or a proof to base it on. So pramana means proof, and then it refers to or infers the 6 proofs of knowledge that you see there. Then you have this word pramanagata sandeha, doubt about the 6 proofs. Then you have the word pramata. Pramata means the measure or the ego that is having the doubts, or the embodied being, the jiva. Then you have pramana chaitanya, consciousness as proof. And that's where they lead you. They say, yes, here's these proofs. You may doubt them, but the doubt comes from your ego. And here's how to get over the influence of your ego, by acknowledging that consciousness itself is proof of consciousness, that your awareness proves awareness. And nobody says, I'm not. Everyone says, I am, I am. And that's one of the great statements of India. Sarvosmi, everything is. I am. Aham, aham. Aham Brahmasmi, I am that reality. So that Aham Brahmasmi is humming inside of the word all the time. So this is like a million bumblebees. It's like the unstruck sound of Om. I am, is the underlying melody and current of light and sound, Shabda and Jyoti. And that's existing at the very foundation of your being. You're going to have to go deep, deep, deep to find that foundation and immerse yourself in it. And dive deep, O mind, dive deep into the ocean of God's beauty. If you descend to the uttermost depths, there you will find the gem of love. Is the beginning of one of Kabir's songs. A very beautiful being who was a combination of Sufi and Hinduism, Vedanta and Sufism. So these dive deep, they actually sing these as lyrics of songs. So you have to dive deep below the doubting of the ego, that doubt of the 6 proofs. And then you will know the object of knowing, prameya. Prameya means, of course, the eternal subject, Brahman. If you talk about it as the object of knowing, then you're just talking about it as the main object with a capital O. But really it's the eternal subject. Everything else is an object, but this is the eternal subject. They say often, the eye cannot see itself. It looks and sees everything, but it cannot see itself. So they often use that as a metaphor or analogy for the divine being that is unseen in all of us. Another funny story is that the fish all get together at the bottom of the lake, to learn, because that's what you do when you go to school, and fishes happen to be in schools, you see. So they gather together at the bottom of the lake, and the main thing that they argue about is whether water exists. So that's debate, you see. They're floating in this stuff, but it's just clear. And there's so much a part of them that they can't see it. And so they don't make any conclusion about it, or even go beyond it and say, there's a lake of it all around me. That's the same with the aspiring being. They have to realize that existence is that very nature of everything, and that they're in an ocean of it, and then they can move about in it. If you don't acknowledge it, then you only man one state of consciousness called the waking state, and that's all that's real to you. And matter is in the waking state, form is in the waking state, solidity, liquidity, all of those things are in the waking state, and that becomes your whole world, materialism. If you add the senses to it, then you become a sensualist who likes to enjoy the materials of the world. And so it's all still in the waking state. because you still have other levels of consciousness to discover. So these 5 words, all related to that Sanskrit word pramana, pramana gata sandeha, pramata, pramana chaitanya, and prameya, are all very connected with one another, and they also give you a sort of Sanskrit graph to measure. First, they say there is proof of what you're experiencing. You are actually the proof of that, but there is intellectual, analytical proof that we can give to you. But your ego may come along and doubt it, and when it does, then you need to know that the non-dual truth of the matter first, that consciousness is, that I am. And if you can open up to that premise at first, or that possibility, then it become a vehicle to show you to Brahman, prameya. So it's a lot like the teaching of approaching, seeing, approaching, and having. See, moda, pramoda, and moda is apprehending, and then pramoda is moving towards it, and then you actually possess the thing. See, maybe priya, it becomes most dear to you, and you actually approach to what's dear to you, and you have it. So that's another way of explaining it in the tradition. Now let's look at some of these. The first one up there is Arthapati. Now I'm going to try and make this, although it's very involved, I'll make this easy for you by way of examples that are given sometimes in the traditions when you study them. Arthapati means postulation. It's a distinct, valid method of immediate knowledge. The example you would say is, if you could use a sort of statement, you could say, knowledge of Brahman transcends grief. So then you come to know that knowledge destroys grief, and you believe in knowledge. It can destroy the ignorance that causes grief. So that's an example of arthapati. It's a supposition that you present, or postulation. Or sometimes they use the idea that, say, a person who's overweight comes and says, well, I don't eat in the day. So you've got an obese person who says to you, I don't eat in the day. So what do you postulate? He must eat at night because he's obese. See? So that's an example of how you use postulation. Now, as far as how you use it in Vedanta, if you say the knower of the self transcends grief, then here we see that knowledge destroys grief, and it can be assumed without any doubt that all grief is false. And so it's a false superimposition over your consciousness. And so you can remove it by these great statements. So this is what we would call an assumption. But they say in Vedanta, and in Advaita Vedanta particularly, these assumptions are very valid ways of proceeding in spiritual growth. Especially when you come to a great statement like that. That is, knowledge of Brahman destroys grief. You know that the person that is in the knowledge of Brahman does not suffer from grief the way you do, if you're suffering from grief. So it's an assumption that has valid testimony behind it. Now, another one of these is called, across the board here, Anupalabdhi. Anupalabdhi is that formlessness proves the existence of, or form proves the existence of formlessness. Basically, it's this non-apprehension, or the non-existence of a thing proves that it exists. And you have to do some deep thinking around Anupalabdhi. That means basically, if we were to say, this morning I came here and I was in this room and I gave the satsang, right? So I gave satsang to live streaming audience from 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. And the teacher was in this room. But then I left, and then the teacher was not in this room. So if you had seen the live streaming, and you say, well, the teacher was in the room, but then you come and visit the ashram after I've left, and you say, oh, the teacher's not in the room anymore. But you would have known by the fact that I'm not here that I exist. Do you follow? So if I was drinking out of this cup, you see, and would say, graciously bring me in case I have any problem speaking, and then I was looking somewhere, and then they took the cup away, you see. And then I looked over here and I said, oh, the cup was there. See. Then I'm proving the existence of something by something that's not there. See. So the idea is that we know both sides. We know both existence and non-existence. Therefore, they both exist. So anything that's non-existence is really unreal. It's not true. Everything exists. Sarvosmi. Everything exists because the mind knows it all and has seen it all. Now you can apply this even to your birth and your death. It's one of the more powerful ways of applying Anupalabdhi. Basically is that we've all been a witness to our birth, and we were also there at the time of our death. That means there was a independent witness. Is that? It's not listed in these 6, but sometimes they include it in some of these other systems. It's called Sakshi. Sakshi itself is a proof of God's existence. It means there is a witness looking on. Sakshi means witness. And it's a witness to all phenomena. Here it is, yes. One of the 2 proofs here that are also added to these in different philosophies. The Puranas add those 2 proofs, you see. That's why it's important to know that there are different scriptures, Vedas, Upanishads, Gita, Puranas, Tantras, Darshanas, and so forth, so that you won't miss out on some of these proofs of truth, because hearing one of them might be the one that does it for you, might be the old proverbial straw that broke the camel's back, and you say, that makes sense to me, I've never heard it put that way. And that was actually why I'm bringing forth the idea of you being the witness to your own birth and your own death, because it's very much like going into deep sleep tonight. You don't know what happened when you went into deep sleep. All you know is that money, house, children, everything that was important to you disappeared for several hours, depending on how deep your deep sleep is. And then when you came back again, you saw it again. So it was not there in deep sleep, and then all of a sudden it was there in dreaming, and it was solid in waking. So Anupalabdhi is at work in the philosopher's mind. You see, when they're looking at an important principle like proving the existence of divine reality to themselves or even to other people, their students say, or to non-believers. So that the teacher was in the room. I knew it. He was there. The cup was there, and so forth. That's really classic examples of Anupalabdhi. The non-existence of a thing proves the existence of it, because we're aware of both existence and non-existence. Both non-perception as well as perception serve as means to get various knowledge for the simple reason that the knower is conscious of both. That's how it's put in the scripture. So you are the witness of all dualities. And some of the highest two dualities are called form and formlessness, bondage and liberation, and existence and non-existence. Those outstrip all other dualities that you could possibly think about. You could sometime take suffering and pleasure, pain and pleasure, and meditate on them and try and transcend them. That's not nowhere near as subtle as trying to think in terms of form and formlessness or existence and non-existence. That's where the mind itself can disappear. So these are just philosophical proofs of existence, or are they actually modes of practice, where if you start thinking about them deeply enough, you get sucked into formlessness, just like a hailstone gets sucked into an ocean. And it happens to the best of them. It happens to the non-believer, the atheist too, quite often. Sometimes Vivekananda said, I met atheists in my life who are much more better people than many of the people who profess to believe in God. So the atheist is just standing on the brink, waiting, for that proof to come along. Non-committal, right? Non-committal. Sort of like some of these darshanas. They're just waiting for that particular gear to turn, in the mechanism, to all of a sudden clarify the whole thing and convince them. The convincing part will be when they're sucked into the experience itself. That's called aparoksha anubhuti, a nice 7 or 8 syllable Sanskrit word, which means the direct experience of divine reality, or Brahman. So, beautiful, these first two. Now, the third one's called upamana, analogy or similitude. This really has to do with placing one thing aside another in order to prove the existence of one. Like, for instance, if you said, if you happen to hear or see for yourself the light of consciousness inside of you, and they say, your teacher said that was Brahman, and then you come out and you say, Brahman was resplendent like the sun when I saw it, or Brahman is resplendent like the sun, then that's an analogy you're making. That's upamana. Means basically you know that Brahman is like the sun, but Brahman is not the sun, so you're using an analogy or something similar to prove the reality or the existence of something that is supremely actual, the divine reality itself. So that's one way in which they explain this. And it's different from inference. We'll look at inference here. Anumana is inference, so it's a different mode. You'll see that when we get to it. But first, let's look at Shabda, verbal testimony. That's just all around us. It's just, again, as I sort of introduced it in the first half, I pre-mentioned it, is that we're getting testimony from all sorts of things, newspapers, books, today, radios, TVs, computer, the web. This is all testimony to us. It has a huge influence on humanity because they're prone to believe things if they see them in writing. Sort of like a habit that human beings have developed. Sri Ramakrishna told a good story about Shabda. Basically, he said, 2 men met on the streets, and one said to the other, you know that old house in our neighborhood up there, a few blocks? It burned down the other day. And the man said, no, I don't believe you. And he ran inside the store. He came out with a newspaper and said, it's not in the newspaper, so it didn't burn down. You're lying to me. So people have this very, very strong penchant or tendency to go and believe things they see in writing or by mere hearsay. Now, Shabda is not hearsay unless you want to call it hearsay of the seers. Shabda is testament that's found in the revealed scriptures, basically. I could flip the chart back and we could see Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, scriptures like we just quoted from Srimad Devi Bhagavatam. These are testaments of the highest and deepest kind because they're based upon lifetimes of illumined souls. That illumined souls have lived and come back to tell us about this highest proof, this highest reality. Their word sometimes is enough. You don't even need the rest of these. If your faith is strong and you've been raised in the Dharma, then it's not a matter of anything having to be proved to you. So the proofs of truth really are for the doubting mind. And the doubting mind, of course, is the ego. The doubting Thomas is T-A-M-A-S, you see. It's really dull and dark, and it dwells in everyone's ego. So the ego of even an advanced aspirant sometimes has doubts. The doubt is one of the last things to go inside of the human mind. Fear and doubt are the last two things to go away. So in the case of doubt, these proofs are very effective means of destroying the last tendrils of doubt so that it will let go and you can have the full experience. So again, they're more like modes of perception than just philosophical proofs. Very important in that way. Shabda, I could go on, for hours about Shabda. I don't need any notes or any books or anything for that. My teacher was an example of Shabda. He was, and of course Vivekananda when he came here, and historians who are stenographers put down all his words in the complete works, which you can read for yourself. He didn't write books, he just spoke. And he used to say, I want to be a voice without a form. And in other words, he didn't want anything in form to impede this oracle that he was in tune with and that he was constantly expressing. That was Shabda. He was like walking Shabda. Shabda Brahman is actually a name for the path to God through sound. So it's followed in India. It's also sometimes called Nada Brahman. Nada means the vibration. So the very vibration of the words can put you in a high state. In Vivekananda's case, 500 people would go to a talk because he had made such a big impression at the Parliament of Religions in 1893. So they took him across the country on train usually, and he would appear at these halls, and he had advance audiences, very large ones. And they would go and hear him talk, and then people would say afterwards, or be asked, what happened. He said, well, from his very first word, I was totally enamored of what he was saying. And I don't remember a lot of what he said, but I just know that I was put in a higher state by his words. So that was Shabda in action, in manifestation. That is, a being of the highest authority speaking on a subject that he had realized, and a subject that was of the highest order, the highest intelligence, Vedanta, for instance. He spoke on a lot of the darshanas, not just Vedanta, but Vedanta, of course, was what he felt we should be learning in the West. First and foremost, that's the universal, has that universal side to it that we need to utilize for helping others and getting outside of the problems of that we have created in a materialistic society and become more selfless. So Shabda, I found that in my own teacher's words too. We would stay focused on every word he said. It didn't matter if a few old people were falling asleep around me. I was there for him. 100% everything he said in every talk he ever gave. So it's a matter of, even if you walk in tamasic, if your mind's a little lazy, you hear a person like that sleep, your tamas is gone. That takes interest. You have to be interested in the subject. You have to be really desirous of getting free and of realizing the import of the words that are being spoken to you. Do you hear the words coming out of my mouth, as they say? You can't believe that you're not actually listening to him, you see, when he says that. So in a matter of Shabda, I have that as my own personal experience, that the teachers I listened to were highest authorities, and what they said rang of truth. And so that impressed me more than anything else could have. All I need to do was then to take it and meditate on it for years. That perseverance we're talking about. See, and so you stay constant with the trend of the teaching that's being given to you in that particular age, through that particular oracle. And it gets passed on, as we said in that earlier chart. It gets Guru Parampara, from Lord Brahma to the mind-born sons like Lord Vashishta, and from Lord Shishta on to the gods, from the Prajapatis. The Prajapatis are the teachers of the gods who are actually human. The highest realized humans teach the gods in this tradition. And then from the gods it trickles down to the celestial levels, and from them to the ancestors. From ancestors bring it to the humans. So this is going around and around in a great cosmic cycle, which far, far outstrips 4,320,000,000 years physical evolutionary cycles. This is eternal. This doesn't have a beginning, middle, and end. Buddha could plug into it, you see, and then give up the body. It's like a river. I think I will come down in that year of that river of time, in that age, give my teaching, and then get out of the river of time. And see what that teaching does to people. How many people can get out of the river of time because I came there and gave that teaching? How many will get free? In the case of divine beings like that, hundreds and thousands can get free. And those who can't get free can at least get salvation. And those who can't get even salvation yet, let's just speak of liberation, they will come back again with more akamai, as you say in Hawaii, more in the know about what the true secret, the true meaning of existence is. So maybe they'll have to hear the pramanas, see the 6 pramanas and think about it some more and really work through it. Anumana, we said, is inference. Let's look at that, because I said we could go on with Shabda for a long time. Anumana means, actually, literally in Sanskrit, knowing after. So there's a precluding knowing that happens before. That's called intuition or insight, something that happens like from, say, deja vu kind of idea that people have, you see, or some sort of remembering of a past lifetime experience. But anumana is knowing after the fact. So that's a kind of literal meaning of the Sanskrit word. It's knowledge that's derived from other knowledge, in other words. And that's why we call it inference. I've often used the analogy of if I see smoke on that hill up there in that forest in the distance, then I infer that there's fire. So that's inference, or anumana. So in other words, as we were saying last week, if I see existence here in humans, and I see creation around me, then I must infer that there's a creator. So you take the first step in the cosmic process. That's really leading you to salvation. I mean, these are proofs of Advaita Vedanta, but they don't necessarily mean that you're in Advaitic realization when you hear them. They want to lead you toward Advaitic realization. So these are the admitted proofs in Advaita Vedanta, the ones that Advaita Vedanta, or non-duality, considers the most important for you to know, so that you can defeat the ego, and that you can strike Maya out of the equation successfully in your lifetime. And have no doubt about it. Be absolutely rock solid in your knowledge. This isn't to prove to other people necessarily. It's really to defeat your deha. You see, it's to defeat your pramana gata sandeha, your ego body. See, that needs to be proved. No one else needs to know this by your power, until you become an authority yourself, if that's what is in the cards for you. But for now, you want to defeat this doubting Thomas inside of you. Tamas, we said. So, where there's smoke, there's fire. So, you have to first start out with the idea of there being a creator for the creation. It just didn't happen out of nothing. Nothing doesn't exist. That's on a t-shirt of a friend of mine. Nothing doesn't exist. There is no such thing as nothing. There's just everything all the time. And when you don't see everything all the time, it just went into hiding. It's called unmanifested nature. And it will come back again if you watch long enough. That's where the witness comes in. If you have to sit under a bo tree for 50 days, or go to the wilderness for 40 days, in order to become the witness and see that happen, then do so. Because time is completely condensed in deep sleep. It's completely condensed in death. 4,320,000,000 years could be a second to you if you're out of form. So this illusion of time, it's all in the mind, isn't it? And space is also in the mind. That's why Vivekananda has said to us in some of these great talks he gave in America in the late 1800s, or early 1900s. He said, coming and going is all nonsense. Where's the time in which the soul will come when all of time is in the soul? Where's the space to which it will go to and which it will come from when all the space is in the soul? So time and space is in you, and you're dreaming yourself around it. See? you're playing inside of these concepts of limitation that the mind has taken on. So it's not like you can posit this as a location in space and time, because space and time is in you, and this is inside of that. So you're talking about an illusion inside of an illusion. See, a concept inside of a concept. It's only when you can cut time down, or as the Upanishads say, wrap time and space up like a skin. Crumple it up and wrap it up, you see, and crush it. Then you'll know what true freedom is, what the witness is, who the witness is, who you are. Not until that time. So in the meantime, you're playing with concepts of the mind, which fire is radiance, water is liquidity, earth is solidity. It's all happened first in your mind, and then came out, and you formed senses to play with them, see. And the objects you formed out of your own intelligence, so that they could be played with your senses. It's all you're doing. God has no part in it. Don't bring him into it. See? Vivekananda said, you cannot drag God down to your comfort zones. You have to raise yourself up to that. Paraphrasing him, see. So that's raise yourself up means inward, and you do that by these various mechanisms that we study. So inference is one of them. Where there's smoke, there's fire. Where there's a creation, there's a creator. Where there's existence, there is the master of existence. These are very convincing proofs that are rational and straightforward. Really, can't really be argued. Existence just is. And if I want to go beyond the idea of creature and creator, or mankind and spirit, or nature and spirit, then I'm going to have to do it by stages. I'll realize that where is the origin for this universe? It's in my mind. Where's my mind? It's in intelligence. Where's my intelligence? It's in the cosmic mind. Where's the cosmic mind? It's in the Word. Where's the Word? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. It is God. And when it isn't God, then it has a little distinction. That's when this vibrational spheres take place. They burgeon and peopled with many beings who want to play in them. See, like the quote of Lord Brahma, sitting, meditating on his creator, and hearing the Om, and then hearing the Bijams come, one by one, given to him in meditation. So you're going to have to go deep into the foundation of your existence to perceive these things. And in the meantime, guide the mind through inference, through shabda, through anumana, and through upamana. These are tried and true by the saints and seers. I think the last one here is pratyaksha, or perception. Immediate cognition would be another good word for it. That is, it consists of two divisions, doesn't it? There's external cognition with our senses, and then there's internal cognition with our mind. The senses I just talked about, actually, and their objects, but the internal cognition is where you'll find the origin of matter, and of objects, and of planets and space and every other darn thing that people are so focused upon externally only, and don't know the origin of, which is inside their own thinking process, as concepts, as high concepts, with the gods and goddesses and with the seers and with the cosmic mind. Those are very, very high concepts. They're playing with universal concepts. Meanwhile, down here, out here, we're playing with these very limited concepts. So, internal perception means direct and immediate cognition. That means outside you're playing with these objects and so on, but inside you're playing with love, hate, pain, pleasure, and a whole host of dualities. That's internal cognition. These experiences of pain and pleasure you're having, and experiences of love and hate and so forth, are properties of your mind. That's inner cognition. These are experiences you're getting from the objects through the senses, right? And they're registering inside of you in your mind. And that's inner cognition. You're extracting experience from your outer experiences, or you should be. Now, the person who just goes from experience to experience, and we've noticed this in the past, is not compiling anything in the form of knowledge through actions. Just goes from experience to experience, and then comes up to you and says, I just live in the moment. But have you extracted anything from those moments, is my next question. What is the essence that you've gotten from your experiences, or are you just bouncing from experience to experience, as so many people seem to be doing? So if they connect the objects to the senses, and the senses to the inner senses, and the inner senses to the mind, and the mind to their intelligence, they'll begin to extract an essence out of each experience. That's called knowledge. Knowledge is not just external then, knowledge is internal. And this begins to point the way towards pratyaksha, a more direct cognitive experience of things that you're having through manana, for instance, or through yukti, reasoning. This is a yukti process. First, you have shruti, to hear, then yukti, you realize it. You analyze it, and then anubhav, you realize it. The 3 proofs of truth, they call it. So inside of the 3 proofs of truth, there are these 10 other levels of proof that you're applying to the whole situation. There are no holes in this philosophy. It's lived a long time, and it's brought forth a lot of darshanas, a lot of seers, a lot of scriptures, and there's a lot of pratyaksham among them. They've all had a lot of direct cognitive experience. That's their higher perception. Now, the thing about pratyaksha is it happens extremely fast. It's one of my favorite of the proofs of truth because the mind is so swift. We've often said that. Faster than the speed of sound is the speed of light. Faster than the speed of light is the speed of mind. Yeah? So that's not, you can't even measure it by split seconds. It's like you can't measure the vibrating particle except in billionths of seconds, how quick it changes. Then imagine how much faster than cognition would be. Immediate, how immediate that would be, especially at the level of Divine Mother, where everything is constantly spontaneous all the time, living in a spontaneous moment. Now there's where you really live in the eternal moment. You're not living in the present, you're living in the eternal moment, because the present is a part of past and future. It's called the 3 phases of time: past, present, and future. So if you're just living in the present, it means you're bouncing from experience to experience and not getting anything out of it. As soon as you start becoming a good miner, you mine the gold of your experiences, then you begin to live in the eternal moment. And that is direct cognition. Now, we mentioned that the Yoga Sutras 44 through 47 of the Yoga Pada 3 that we had in the recent email that you got, yoga lessons you got in the email. Also, I'm reminded of those here because in those slokas, Vivekananda in his commentary is saying that the yogi can sit and know things far off. Far off means both internally and externally. And we get a little bit inkling of this when, say, we hear stories of the mother feeling that her child's in danger, but her child is on the other side of the world, in another country, but yet she all of a sudden feels unhappy and concerned. That can happen in either waking or dreaming state or both. So she's getting this feeling, this intuitive feeling through the nerves, through the nadis that are flowing in the world, that are flowing in her, and that are connecting her to her child, the connectedness of all things, all beings. Different levels of connectors. Some of them are gross, some of them are subtle. So that's an example of knowing things that are far away. But then the thing about the yogi is that it's not just, what's the word, clairvoyant. Because usually clairvoyant is the kind of thing that happens externally far away. But the far away that the yogi experiences, not just externally but internally, begins to intuit things that are happening on an internal level, can see things far in. Not just far out man, but far in, you see. That's proof of pratyaksha operating in a soul like that. So you can see that these 6 proofs of truth are very precious to the Advaita Vedanta I hate to call it a philosophy, so I'm not able to come up with a word, the principle of Advaita Vedanta, the way of truth. Now there, under the dotted line, as we finish up this class, wherein we have looked at pramana and ashtaka and nastaka pretty deeply for a 3-hour session, you see those 2 proofs in the Puranas. Aititya and Sakshi. One is tradition and hearsay, and I mentioned that word earlier, hearsay. Basically, if you believe in the traditions here would be these Astaka and Nastika traditions. If you've heard the truth in them, then you'll already have proof that you need, Aititya. It's the Puranas focus on that and call it most important simply because they are pretty much telling stories about saints and seers and kings and queens and princes and princesses and merchants and warriors and street cleaners and all walks of life and all levels of society. Those stories are woven into the Puranas. And you're getting a lot of information about people coming up against troubles and challenges and having even tribulations and so forth. So then you could see how tradition becomes very important as a matter of hearsay, and that the Puranas at that level of scripture and of existence are putting a lot of accent on the fact of hearing these stories and hearing these truths. Vivekananda was actually raised hearing these stories as a child. Most Hindu mothers will read these great important stories to the children as they grow up. And so then that sets the foundation again for divine remembrance, called Smriti Bedu, the divine causal memory that exists in them. And they will say, oh, I feel like I've heard that story before, or I feel like I've known that seer or that sage, or I recognize my guru when I met him. All of that is just sort of a matter of not hearsay on the common level, but hearsay on the traditional level, where these truths ring in you if you hear them again. Not just, I'll consider that, but I believe that. It's instantaneous understanding and belief. So you can see how it could be based on insight that you got, or shabda, testimony. And this is really explaining the dynamics of how people remember things, and why some people have a trouble accepting things and why some people just accept them right away. In the level of scripture, the ideal is to accept it right away. It's called revealed scripture in our tradition, or non-dual teachings. And the teachers too are accepted right away, because you can realize the difference between a charlatan and an authentic teacher just by the way they're teaching, see what they're presenting. Now, we already talked about sakshi, or witness consciousness. That's a beautiful truth. Why it's not included in the Advaita ones, I would say not traditionally so, but in many of the teachings of Advaita Vedanta, you hear the word sakshi being said. Brahmanandam paramasukadam kevalam jnanamurtim dandvaititam gagana sadrisham tattvama shadi laksham ekam nityam bimalamakchalam sarvadi sakshi bhutam. So you're running along a sloka like that from the various scriptures of Vedanta, and all of a sudden you come across that word sakshi, and you know, oh, the witness, sakshi bhutam, the witness of all phenomena. And then right there, in the testament itself, by the scriptures, given by the realization of a seer, in which all of these are contained, is a mention of a principle so profound that you cannot deny it. That I was a witness to my own birth and my own death, just like I'm a witness to my own life. And if I'm not a very good witness to my own life, then it hasn't been a very conscious life. If I'm going around in a haze all the time. And that my experiences are not giving me anything. I'm not extracting anything out of them. See, you might have, can you remember when that was the case when you were a teenager or something? When you were clueless, when you were lost, and then all of a sudden you got found? What the difference is between those two? Like somebody asked me the other day, do you remember anything before you were in kindergarten? And I couldn't, you see. I was in a haze. That was called not having a developed brain yet, you see. So you only begin to remember things at a certain level. Like I can remember first and second grade in Alaska, walking to school in freezing weather and breaking off icicles that long and having sword fights with them, with my friends, you see. Those memories started to register in me, and I've never forgotten those. And others that were not so nice, like getting my tongue stuck on a metal fence at school once. Talk about walking around in a haze. Misguided action. And they had to come out with hot water and pour it on my tongue after I yelled, "Help, help!" for about an hour in the freezing cold. You see. So those kinds of memories tend to impress themselves upon you, and you won't forget them. But there's a time as consciousness visits these mechanisms called brains that they begin to get more clue. They begin to remember. All of these things come into play here. You know, witness consciousness, inference, proof, precognitive wisdom, knowing after the fact, thinking back later on what happened to you. All of this has to do with gathering experience, and that's the only purpose that you're acting. According to Vivekananda in the scriptures, there's only one purpose for action. That's to gather knowledge. There is no other purpose for it whatsoever. That is, no purpose that is going to accrue to anything beneficial to you whatsoever. You can go on acting and acting forever, and it will not give you the least shred of enlightenment. It's only when you start to get knowledge from your actions that you begin to get the point of existence. And at some point you'll ask, what's the meaning of existence? And that's the first inkling of light. And then you'll have to know, maybe you won't be brought traditionally to each pramana of the 6 proofs or the 10 proofs, but you will eventually come up against them whether you know it or not. And it will all of a sudden occur to you that I am the witness of all this. Usually that happens to people when they practice meditation. All of a sudden they get some distance from things. And they know there is a witness that's been looking on, and it is looking on all the time. Meditation is the definitive practice for that. So, Sakshi Bhutam, or Sakshi, one of the beautiful proofs of truth, I think. Now, here you see at the bottom, as a review, these 6 proofs defined. So, first, presumption. That's arthapati. Let's go through them for your notes. Assumption of a known fact in order to account for an unknown fact. Then, non-apprehension. That's anupalabdhi. Non-perception of a thing based upon the perception of the knower. That is, the teacher was in the room, now he isn't. The glass was there, now it isn't. The flower had a fragrance, now it doesn't. So any way you want to put it, you have these ideas of the non-existence of a thing or non-perception of a thing, proving that it was perceived once. It would have to have been perceived once in order to not be perceived again. So the two play together. Analogy is upamana. That means attainment of knowledge by comparison and similarity. He shines like the sun, a kind of comparison that you make. Then we went to Shabda, verbal testimony, called apyavakyas or agama. It means uttered or written statements. So, spoken by the luminary or written down and read by you. Those are the forms of shabda that you want to. They're like shabda, verbal testimony. Then finally you get to anumana, inference, called knowing after. It is a way of gaining knowledge from other knowledge. Something happens, you glean something from it. That's why I keep leading us toward that idea of getting some concrete essence from your experiences. That thing that's happening to you is karmic, or it's predestined, or it's happening by a matter of grace. And so you have to look at it, each thing. It's called living consciously nowadays, or being aware. See, mindfulness, the Buddhists call it. By simply observing like that, then you can extract the essence from a thing and take it with you. And a whole bunch of experiences at the time of your death, you can use that as a very powerful tool. You just, in the Upanishads it even says, the monk looks up at the sky and he says, "Oh Lord, take away the sun, because it's hiding your real light. The physical sun is distracting me. Take it away. I want to see your real light." And then later on, the Upanishad, this same monk is saying, "Oh, remember past deeds. You're passing from the body. Remember past deeds. Remember past deeds." So this is what I mean about, if you've gathered experience from your past deeds, then you can pull that together at the time of death, and you're not wandering after you're disembodied. You're not wandering away into non-cognition. You have precognition. You're not wandering away into void, because you have proof of existence, you see. This is a soul that knows how to be reborn again in knowledge. You might have noticed there are some souls that are born again in pure consciousness of themselves, but there are lesser souls that are born again just with knowledge. They're intellectuals. And it's easy for them to make sense out of life. They just go straight to the mead of their trade. So they're not born in ignorance, but they're not born in higher knowledge either. So there are cases of beings that can gather some essence from their experiences, and they become masterful of at least one thing. See, if they're a masterful violinist, then they'll probably come out of the womb like this, in this mudra. You see, the baby doctors say, "That's strange. Put those arms down. Just drop a violin in it." You see. So that's all by impression. Now, then there's inference. Oh, we said that. Then there's perception. Direct, immediate cognition, external and internal, by the 10 senses. Wow. See, if you are not in the know about Vedanta or Eastern traditions, you'd say, "Where'd you get the other 5? They're like dream senses inside of me, and the outer senses connect to them. So they all connect to the mind, the ultimate sense. And so this is where I have external cognition, like you. But guess what? I also have internal cognition developed. And that's going to help me at the time of my death, for instance, or in meditation, to make important connections. Now, let's read the final quote and then close our class for today. It's from the Shaiva Siddhanta Darshana. Remember these darshanas over here we were talking about that are a part of the scriptures by classification? This comes from the Shaiva Darshanas. It's a good quote. It says, "Knowledge has come to the soul in 2 ways. Through the instrumentality of the 4 inner faculties, that's the fourfold mind, and through the 5 states of consciousness that receive their source material from the 5 senses. So they're called avastas, or stages. Further, knowing is not a self-contained process, for it receives its initiative and its direction from God. God activates the soul and causes it to know in the same way as the soul activates the 5 organs of sense and causes them to know." So who's your activator? They say, who's the one that's operating this mechanism? You see, you have to look back. It's you, but it's your true nature. And if you're thinking the ego is operating it, aren't you falling under the imposition of the knowledge that comes as the instrumentality of the 4 inner faculties? Because the fourfold mind contains ego as one of them. Thought, dual mind, ego, and intelligence are the fourfold mind. Antakarna, the inner organ, the inner cause of everything, is the fourfold mind. So that level of knowledge is not ultimate, it's penultimate. But what they're talking about here then is that God activates that mind and all the mechanisms that are connected to it, just like you, your ego, activates the senses to get experiences from nature. Talk about a witness, you see, or an inner process that you're going to have to follow that transcends the little bliss of the ego and goes to the ananda of the spirit. So I'll leave you with those tantalizing teachings of the Dharma and a quick view through the pramanas, or 6 proofs, and some of the other proofs that also there, some 10 or 12 of them really, if you look at more darshana than just the one Vedantic darshana. So here, then, we'll move toward next Sunday's satsang and class on Shakta Advaita Vada. We will look at the threefold Prakasha, Vikshepa, and Avarana Shakti, and we'll also probably look at the Trinity. I have a brand new chart on the Trinity that will be very beautiful to see, that none of you have seen yet, at any retreat or at any class. So I'll have that ready for you, I hope. So here, let's end with a chant, as is traditional. Om Sato Ma Sadgamoya Tamaso Ma Joytir Gamoya Mrichor Ma Amritam Gamaya Abira Mayeti Rudrayate Dakshinam Mukam Tenamam Pahinicham Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Lead us from darkness to light, from lower truth to higher truth, from the unreal to the real, and from the illusion of death to eternal life. Reach us through and through, O Lord and Mother of the universe, with thy sweet and benign presence. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, and may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om.